8 months after its release and 6 months after its demise, and they cannot stop complaining about the failure of Dragon Age the Veilguard. This is absolutely wild. Both the creatives and the bean counters cannot hold the L with this atrocious game. I watched a lot of gameplay on this one. Okay, I have somewhat of a history with the franchise overall. It was something that never really appealed to me, but at least, growing up in on and around the time when BioWare was at their full power, when they were cranking out hit after hit after hit, I respected the franchise for what it was. I'm not really a big fantasy guy, for as much as I like to tout, Tolkien and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. It's not really something that really works for me. Like the more spacey sci-fi aesthetics, that's a little bit more my pace. It's still not like my big go-to. Maybe when it comes to, like overall genre of fantasy, or maybe just genre in general, maybe that's what I'll go ahead and gravitate towards if I need to be pushed in one direction or another. So yeah, that's why, and for several other reasons, that's why I gravitated more towards Mass Effect, but I always had a healthy respect for Dragon Age. So to see what ultimately became of this once great franchise, I could understand the upset that was out there, but apparently the game's journalists, if we're going to go ahead and take them at face value, which I think is a fool's proposition at this point in time, I think that they're being Weasley little liars, dude. What I have pulled up here before we get into some of the more recent news is one of the reviews, actually one of the later ones that came out March 24th, okay, of this year from Game Informer, the recently relaunched Game Informer, which, oh god, that was a story that I missed out at the beginning of the year, but the cliff notes on this one was, hey, you guys remember Game Informer? That was that annoying magazine that was being hawked at every EB Games and GameStop the last time that you went there, and it was probably a contributing factor as to why you never wanted to darken their doorstep ever again. That, and of course being constantly bombarded with upsells and pre-order opportunities. But no, it was always just a shill rag that you would just quietly throw away in the trash bin outside of the store. No, they were going to be bringing it back. They were resurrected by a lot of the people that led to the outlet's downfall, but hey, they're going to be coming back and they're going to be promoting their work on Blue Sky. So it's like, oh, okay, cool, we know exactly where we're going on this one. So that's probably why I didn't end up covering it. It's like, oh great, yeah, a bunch of lefties that ended up getting fired are now coming back together to start up some kind of a commune and try to save games journalism with the same type of games journalism that corrupted them and destroyed them to begin with. So yeah, best of luck in your future endeavors if you last the year. But yeah, this was the common sentiment, and in fact, we get down to the number score at the bottom, and it gets an 8 from Game Informer. Talk about how it sticks to the landing, how, what was it, IGN? It's like, even if we don't get another Dragon Age game, that's a great high point for the franchise to go out on. And it's like, what are you admitting here? Is like, are you just trying to shill for something that aligns with your own personal politics, but is ultimately not a good story and not a good game? What are you actually saying here? But no, this was something that everybody in games journalism, they were touting and that they were saying is the best game ever, and they wanted this game. Oh, they wanted it so badly to get Game of the Year at so many outlets. But the only recognition that it got from the awards community was Game of the Year, GAYME of the Year. Talked about that before when that went down. But no, in recent weeks, it's still interesting, right? Because we have a bunch of these quote-unquote creatives that worked on one of the least creative games that I've seen in a very long time come out and chide everybody but themselves for the game's failure. Okay, because we have a former BioWare lead that says Dragon Age the Veilguard team was jerked around due to EA's disinterest in the franchise. Mark Dara says 2017 might have been the most impactful 12 months in the studio's history. Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so 2017, last time I checked, was 8 years ago. And you're saying because of some shit that happened the better part of a decade ago led to the flop that we just got a few months ago. Make that one make sense there, Mark. Former Dragon Age series executive producer Mark Dara says that he doesn't feel EA and BioWare efficiently supported his team during the early development of Dragon Age the Veilguard. Well, that's your problem right there. Early development, 2017. 2024 release date. Make that one make sense. The ex-BioWare developer shed a light on his time working at the legendary fantasy RPG franchise during a recent video upload to his YouTube channel because, he can't present a video from the BioWare YouTube channel because he got shit canned. The story recounts events that transpired throughout 2017, or according to Dara, the most impactful 12-month in BioWare's history. He touches on not only the decisions that affected the early development of last year's Dragon Age game, but how the change in attitude was tied to the final days of development on Mass Effect Andromeda. fuck that game. Fuck it right in its big gay ass. God damn it, man. Every opportunity that I have to shit on that and dance on its grave, I will take it. Oh, God, that's the game that killed my interest in gaming, full stop. But I've spoken enough about that, interestingly enough, recently. It starts in late 2016 when Dara was moved over to the team that would handle the last stages of development on Andromeda. He says that the feeling at the time was that the Dragon Age team felt jerked around and had no support from BioWare or EA. The hope was that Dara could aid in getting Mass Effect out the door so that the next Dragon Age could utilize more resources. No, though this ultimately didn't quite pan out. This is the first time where we had this leadership discontinuity, where the person in charge of the project left, and that the project that left that project to help someone else, some other project, and that the project continued to run, Dara explained. In the cast of Mass Effect Andromeda, I don't think the impact of Dragon Age was huge. So you felt jerked around, but your primary focus wasn't that negatively impacted. It wasn't very long, and it did set this precedent as being a thing that we could do. And it's not a good thing to do. It's incredibly dangerous to have a project run while it's missing some of its core leadership. I mean, that kind of sounds like a you problem, my guy. Mass Effect Andromeda launched in March of 2017, and in Dara's own words, it doesn't go well. Throughout this time, BioWare was still adjusting to a structural change that saw the team reporting to new leadership at EA, and that was hyper interested in its projects and plans. He calls the change dramatic, noting that the studio's new bosses weren't interested in continuing work on Mass Effect due to its recently troubled launch. Now, the game was ass. It was fundamentally broken. In fact, it was Veilguard 1.0 if we're going to keep it a buck, okay? The character work was absolutely abysmal. Now, the functions and the gameplay elements that had made the Mass Effect trilogy so strong were stripped back and removed for pathetic exploration elements that just never really came to fruition. Be the Mako from Mass Effect 1 25 times over, as opposed to having to deal with that goofy ass and not Liara ever again. Peaky, PP, or whatever pissin' name was. Terrible character, ass character, all of them sucked. But it's funny, right? Okay, even back in 2017, he knew that the writing was on the wall, but still continued to work at the studio for the better part of a decade. But would these end up being the same EA executives that thought BioWare fans would eat whatever slop they were given, since the nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG? Which, interesting stuff, huh? Because after Andromeda, Andromeda was the first time people looked around and went, ooh, BioWare, you kind of suck, because there was a lot of shit that was thrown at the writer's way for the conclusion of for the Mass Effect trilogy. But overall, Mass Effect 3 is a really good game. You might disagree with how the story ended. I personally didn't have a problem with it. I got to go back and play that trilogy at some point in time. I got a long list of games I want to go back and play, but that's right close to the top. Pretty close to the top. Not quite at the top. Got a couple of other games I want to play first. But anyways, perhaps with a more critical perspective, I'll be able to properly assess the overall quality of the narrative, but all of that in due time, because I would be getting far too in the weeds as opposed to what, EA executives were thinking, because, they'll just go out there, they'll just eat the slop because an RPG is an RPG. Are you having a laugh? Okay, because Andromeda, might have had that early boost, but after that, sales fell right off, and they announced in fairly short order, that they will not be continuing with support. All those DLC plans, scrapped. We're going to be moving on to something a little bit more attractive in the form of Anthem. How will that work out for you? Okay, but hey, Dragon Age Inquisition, that received a multitude of Game of the Year awards, right? And then we're going to follow that up about 10 years later with the Veilguard. And, well, BioWare very likely isn't going to be the studio that releases Mass Effect 5, if that ever does, in fact, see the light of day. Okay, who's talking here? Oh god, it's PC Gamer, and this is just as odious as any of the quotes that you could get out of an EA executive. Peter Mandelson, the oligarchous right hand of Tony Blair's Labour Party in the late 90s. It's like, I want to hear some shit about games here, bro. What are we doing bringing in UK politics, okay? Once remarked to a colleague that the party had no need to focus on its traditional voter base and could safely dedicate itself to choosing more affluent middle-class conservative voters. After all, said Mandelson, its base had nowhere else to go. Don't worry, I promise you we'll get to Dragon Age. No, we see where we're going on this one, okay? You're not so fucking smart that the rest of us can't catch on to just very obvious allegory, you tard. 14 years of conservative party rule later, and you might think that that kind of reasoning has been proven bankrupt, but only if you underestimate the powerful minds of the world's corporate executive class. It's not quite as consequential as the direction of British politics, but it turns out that EA had its own version of a thought process when it came to running BioWare in the 2010s, a notion that RPG fans would gobble up whatever you chucked their way, so long as you could plausibly call it an RPG. Instead, they thought BioWare should focus on making games that appeal to people who don't usually play RPGs. Fantastic. Both of them have borked fucking interpretations. How about making a good game? How about nobody knew who BioWare was to begin with, and then it's like, oh shit, we just made banger after banger after banger, and then people who didn't know what an RPG was, seen what a BioWare RPG was, and they went, yeah, you know what? We're going to go ahead and play the type of game that you're used to experimenting with and that you're used to playing with over in the likes of Final Fantasy, Star Ocean, hell, Kingdom Hearts at that point in time. Or any of the other Western slop that was out there, any of your Elder Scrolls games, and I'm only somewhat joking. But yeah, instead of appealing to their core audience, you know, creating people that will go out and say, yeah, hey man, you need to get on this BioWare bandwagon. They make some really good shit. No. Just appeal to the people that would never play their game to begin with, or at least buy it. Oh, I guess that's who you were still working for in regards to the Veilguard. Worked out well for you, huh? So says David Gaider, creator of the Dragon Age setting and BioWare veteran. Oh yeah, in a recent chat with Games Radar per Gaider, EA bosses used to refer to RPG stalwarts as living in the cave. Really? That'd be a nerd cave, you see. Oh, where the nerds lived. Right, yeah. You made an RPG, and the nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was, in fact, an RPG. Jesus. EA bosses convinced that the nerd cave would spill out its denizens to any game with BioWare on the box. Their philosophy became that you didn't have to try to appeal to them. You just had to worry about the people who weren't in the cave, which was the audience we actually wanted, which was much larger. So EA thinks you're stupid, and BioWare thought that they didn't need you. Okay, cool. But they both took the audience for granted. What's the difference here? Which is how it ended up. You had decidedly more actiony and slick cinematic focuses of Mass Effects 2 and 3 and Andromeda, as well as Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. And Veilguard as well, yeah, honestly. Gone were the crunchy stats and behind-the-scenes dice rolls from BioWare of yore. Like, honestly, everything from Mass Effect 1 is a strict upgrade to Mass Effect 2. Like, I know that there's some purists that are out there that's like, I don't like this unless it's my strict definition of an RPG, but I like some story beats from Mass Effect 1, but playing that shit is fucking cumbersome. That was the last time that I played through the trilogy, like, what was that, 7-8 years ago? I digress. Yeah, gone were the crunchy behind the scenes stats, blah, blah, blah. This was an era of spectacle, and to be fair, the executives, for just a second, some of those games were bangers. Yeah, Inquisition was quite well received, and 2 is widely considered one of the best games of all time, and 3, well, to be completely honest, still sold gangbusters for as much as people want to complain about, oh, the color-coded endings, there's no difference. Like, eventually, you kind of have to bring a narrative to a head, but like I said before, I gotta really re-experience that. But Gaider wasn't thrilled that things were increasingly pushed in that direction and away from BioWare's roots, but you stayed on, and then you even came back to work on Veilguard. What's the problem there, Dave? I was always trying to push it to our traditional mechanics, and that wasn't very welcome in the EA sphere. Gaider left BioWare in 2016, first heading to Beamdog, the Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition fame, and then his own studio at Summerfall, currently working on the unholy roguelike deck builder has meant he dodged the release of what ultimate expression of EA's action-obsessed executive philosophy, Anthem, which is not a good game. Oh well, thanks PC Gamer for stating the fucking obvious. Not even the Nerd Cave. Yes, it turned out for that one. But it's so funny, right? From executive producers to long-time lore veterans, they cannot simply accept that they, at the end of the day, they were the ones that created these shit games, okay? EA might have had a proclivity for pushing more action-focused games, but that doesn't forgive the horrific characters that you guys created. That doesn't forgive the stripped-down mechanics that you just put out there and thought that, hey, it's an RPG, right? Like, if you had an edict, if you're a studio like BioWare who have specialized in Western RPGs, and they tell you to just simply make an RPG, and that's the best that you can create with Andromeda, the Veilguard, Dragon Age 2, if we even want to go way back in the cut on that one, and you want to blame everybody else else except for yourself, there's a good reason that BioWare is on death's door. There's a reason why these two fucking hacks can't find work in the industry, because it is dying, and it's decision makers and it's creatives like you guys that have led to the collapse of the Western gaming industry. Sayo fucking Nara. So with all that said, thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.